Hey Reef Builders, Evan Montgomery coming at you today from the Reef Builders studio. It's been a while since I've personally done a video here from the studio, so it was pretty fun getting all the camera equipment set back up today for the first time in a while and thinking about what I wanted to tell you guys about. But I've noticed in the comments over forever, basically, that a lot of people always ask about kind of the behind the scenes, like our maintenance routines and what supplements do we use and light schedules and how we clean pumps and how we do water changes. There's been a lot of comments and questions over the years that have gone unanswered. So it's not gonna be like one video back to back, but I'd kind of like to do like a little series on some of the behind the scenes stuff, and as we go, some of the little tips and tricks that we use here at Reef Builders. So I'm gonna start today talking about some chemistry stuff. Probably do another video down the road detailing like what test kits we use and the exact testing procedures. Testing your water is also a really good indicator as to whether or not all your equipment is working properly. For example, the other day I did the water tests and I noticed that the alkalinity had dropped really significantly on one of our tanks, and I go over there and sure enough the dosing tube inside the actual head from the dosing pump had cracked and was just leaking buffer inside the stand and not actually going in the tank. I might not have caught that for a couple days if it wasn't for the water tests. So keeping chemistry is very important, but I'm kind of going down the rabbit hole of a future video here. Today's is going to be mostly about kalkwasser, and there's been a lot of talk about kalkwasser on various podcasts and kind of throughout the industry recently. And that has mostly to do with pH. And there's a lot of people that keep aquariums in closed up environments with a lot of CO2 just from your family breathing, your pets breathing, your fish breathing, and the CO2 has nowhere to go, so that will depress your pH. That is probably one of the most commonly, the most common examples of why people would want to use kalkwasser and why people's pH would be low. In our case, we do a pretty good job of ventilating the space. We have a CO2 monitor. If it gets above, it depends on the day and how cold it is outside, but if it gets above a certain level, we'll go ahead and crack the windows and let some fresh air in here. The main reason our pH is low is because the primary driving source for calcium and alkalinity on this coral flat, which is clearly full of rapidly growing SPS corals, which is also tied into the entire system on the wall and the coral flat behind me. So obviously there's a lot of high demand here. So the main source driver of our calcium and alkalinity in this tank is a Deltec Twin-Tech calcium reactor, which looks really nice right now because just before Jake left, we spent the day kind of cleaning that out and resetting it, which we really only have to, completely disassemble it and clean it out about once a year. Other than that, we just top it off a little bit with some more media. A system like this really requires a lot of kalkwasser to balance out how much of the CO2 laden effluent from the calcium reactor we're putting in. So we have a stack of 2 large vats over here with a level indicator on the side. These are all plumbed into the city water with float valves. The top water vat is just gravity feed to the float valves around the studio, so that is just for top off. The bottom vat is being drawn with a pack of Versa dosing pumps, and that distributes the water to all of the kalkwasser reactors around the studio. We have 3, 1 on each coral flat, and then also kind of run behind the wall back down here along the floor underneath the threshold. You wouldn't know it, but we actually have some dosing lines that feed float valves for top off, and then also kalkwasser reactors on both of these peninsula systems. So we have kalkwasser kind of automatically throughout the studio. Just a little basic observation of a kalkwasser reactor is really all it takes to understand when it's time to perform a little maintenance. The internal parts can clog with kalkwasser, which will slow down the drip rate. The peristaltic dosing tubing that you're using to feed a kalkwasser reactor can wear out over time. And we've never been super scientific about, getting a beaker and holding it under there and measuring over a minute exactly how much water is coming out. We just look at them every day and basically have a general sense of how many drips per second or how many seconds per drip in either case should be coming out. And we really notice when they start to slow down. In addition to that, we have a pH monitor up here with the probe actually in one of our kalkwasser reactors. Now, pH probes are not meant to be submerged in kalkwasser 24 hours a day. So this one loses calibration pretty quick, but it does give us a general sense, when it starts to get down much below 10 and especially down towards 9 like it is right now. That's how we know you know, even though there's still some powder at the bottom of the calc reactor still spinning around and being stirred, it's really not as potent. But we'll try to do them all within the same week so that we know that once this one starts getting low, that they're all probably getting a little bit depleted and it's time to recharge them. So typically the pH gets below where we're comfortable with and we feel that it's not really doing all that it could about every month to 6 weeks. And it's not that often that we actually take the reactor out and give it a full clean like I'm gonna do today. We'll just kind of take it, you know, take the tubing out of the inside, inspect that, make sure it's not clogged, and do what I'm about to do here, which in either case is step 1. So I've already turned the motor off, so it's not spinning anymore. I'm gonna now go ahead and I'm gonna unhook the water line, and that can just drip into the back of the tank there. That's just fresh water, that's no problem. Then I'm gonna take the top off of this, and I'm gonna remove the downspout here, which we kind of modified a little bit with a fatter piece of PVC on the end so that it doesn't clog up quite as easily. And I'll throw that in the bucket. And then I kind of just set the motor assembly to the side while I do this next part, which is just a rigid hose on the end of a flexible tube. Start a siphon like you would. Careful not to get calc in your mouth, obviously. I've done it, it's not the best. And then just siphon that. And the main reason we want to do this is to lower the water level in the calc reactor so that when we remove it, it's not splashing calc all over into the tank and stuff. But what we would normally do on a, call it monthly basis, is just go in here and siphon up the chunks, the kind of the sludge, the stuff off the bottom that didn't dissolve. So I'm really getting my hand down in there. And this is why it's best to turn off the motor too, because you can kind of get the tube stuck around, wrapped around in there. So now on a monthly basis, we're half done. That's all we do. And then at that point, we would take our new kalkwasser powder, and I would just put, in these larger reactors, we use 2 cups. In the smaller reactors, we use 1 cup of the dry powder. And then I would put that in there and then just kind of move this up and down to mix it a little bit. And then for most of the reactors, I would just let it settle as the dosing pump slowly refills the reactor over time. But for this one, since it has a pH probe in there that we don't want to dry out, this particular reactor is the only one that I'll actually manually kind of refill when I'm doing this process. But this one's been a while. You know, I can't really see into the reactor anymore, which is kind of the observation is a rather important part, actually being able to see, you know, whether the motor is actually still spinning in there and whatnot. So after a few months, you know, they really start to cloud up, and it's time for a good old acid bath. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this calc reactor out and take it over to the workshop, and I'll show you the next step in kind of our more deep cleaning on a kalkwasser reactor. This actually does detach right here. I'm not sure if I'm gonna bother to do that today because it looks okay. It's just a little bit of little light crust on there, nothing too bad. But sometimes I'll just put a tray here because you don't want that chunky kalkwasser to like falling in the system. So I just set it on a tray. That way I can leave the cable management in place. But I wanted to mention that it is still very important to inspect the motor. We found one of ours fairly recently that I think was actually the reactor that Jake was using at his home tank many years ago. So it had put it in its time, but we found some kind of like weird rust kind of dripping out of it. So we replaced the motor on that one. But I just kind of wanted to show you what we do with our cable management here. You know, instead of undoing all the cables and power supplies and everything, you can kind of just inspect certain parts in place. You don't have to have everything over at the sink every single time. All right, here we are in the workshop. Brought the kalkwasser reactor over to the sink. First steps first is just to dump the rest of what's in there. Just dump all that out, which is still a bunch of kind of old chunky white stuff. And then I usually just get it as clean as I possibly can, just, you know, on the surface here, kind of spray it off, wipe some of this, wipe some of the feather dusters, tube worms, stuff like that off. I mean, this right here is pretty much like doing the dishes. This is pretty basic aquarium maintenance, husbandry type stuff right here. You could spend pretty much your whole lifetime trying to get that white crust off the inside. I know people have mixed feelings about muriatic acid, but that is our go-to here at the studio. We use just dilute amounts. We don't go crazy with it. We also buy like the low vapor version, if there is such a thing. So it's a little safer for use indoors. And like I said, we we try to keep the dilution pretty low. We'd rather let it sit for another 10 minutes than have like a big chemical cloud come up. So I kind of do this, you know, these odd shaped large reactors are kind of tricky for protein skimmers and stuff like this. Sometimes I'll try to soak it like inside of a tray. This one's a little big for that tray. The bucket would maybe work for this one, but for a reactor with no ports or holes or way for water to get out on the bottom, kind of the simplest way is to just fill it up, maybe fill this one up halfway here. And then we're kind of not super scientific about this part either. I just put in, I don't know, somewhere around between half a cup and a cup, just you know, one healthy glug, and then carefully kind of swirl this around. You know, I guess with this part to consider all of the disclaimers about acid and not getting it on your skin and clothes or in your eyes, safety glasses, gloves. You know, if you've never handled stuff like that before, it's a pretty good idea to take a little extra care, or just use vinegar, something a little safer. But if we look down in here, you can see it bubbling away. Yeah, on second thought, I think I'm gonna go a little more than half. I was just gonna get in there with the sponge and try to get the top part, but, and I'm aware you're not supposed to add water to acid, you're supposed to add acid to water. However, this is fairly dilute. Once that fizzing stops, you kind of know you're done. There's a little bit of core line on the outside of this reactor. I'm probably not gonna worry about that too much, just whatever the sponge can take off.
5 minutes later.
There's still some bubbles coming up in there, so it's not quite done cooking, if you want to call it that, just yet. Well, as long as that calc reactor is sitting there soaking for a little bit, I figured I'd mention what we use for kalkwasser. Yeah, a lot of people say that you can just go to Walmart and buy pickling lime, and yeah, technically that is calcium hydroxide, but it's not quite the, I don't know, purity, I guess is the word I'm looking for. There have been a few people over the years that have done a few tests with that and not been super happy with the results. So we are a huge fan of the Brightwell Aquatics Calc Plus 2. This bucket's almost empty, which is why I'm able to lift it like this. Normally they're a little heavier than that. But this actually, not only is it the kalkwasser, but it contains some percentage, I'm not sure, of magnesium. And we rarely, if ever, have to dose magnesiums in our system that we run Calc Plus 2 on. So by putting the kalkwasser reactor on there, for us, it's like raising our pH and delivering some calcium and a little alkalinity and all that, but it's also providing magnesium. So that literally removes an entire step from our regimen that we would have to do on a daily basis, or a monthly basis, say anyways, to dose magnesium, because the Brightwell, they put that in there. So we're a huge fan of that. We use a wide range of Brightwell products here at the studio. So this calc reactor is still bubbling over here. So in the meantime, I was looking around the workshop and I noticed that our calcium reservoir is basically empty. There's like half a liter left in there. So I thought while we were waiting for the calc reactor to finish kind of soaking in the acid over here, that I would show you our technique for how we mix up some supplements. And this would be the same technique we use for calcium, alkalinity, magnesium. I guess those are the main three we do. So let me grab a few buckets and stuff, and then I'll come back and show you how we do that. All right, here we are. Just cracked open a fresh box, or bucket I should say, of Calcium P from Brightwell Aquatics. Nice full bucket. These usually last us, I would guess, somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 months or more, which actually is kind of a lot of calcium considering it's just being absorbed by corals. But anyway, I'll try to do this one-handed with the camera here. We have found over the years of mixing up the Brightwell stuff in particular, but any supplements, that they really do mix better with RO water than tap water. So we have our RO vat here with the spigot, exactly 5-gallon bucket height. So we'll go ahead and fill up this bucket. I'll show you what our water, or supplement reservoirs I should say, look like. We have a little stack here. We have buffer for alkalinity on the top, calcium in the middle, as you can see, is empty, and then magnesium down below is still pretty full. And these things kind of drip and leak a little bit, so in the process of filling them, I usually clean them up a little bit as well. In case you were wondering why our alkalinity solution was blue, and though there's not much left of the calcium, you can see that that is slightly pink. We actually put a couple drops of just normal, nothing fancy, just normal food dye with there, I mean, you know, in 6 gallons we put 2 drops in, just to give it a slight tint, because color coordination is never a bad thing. And actually on some of our tanks we have the dosing tubes color coordinated to the color of the actual fluids. So just a little kind of a fun bit of continuity that you won't find too many other places. Because of the size of our dosing containers, or our storage reservoirs I should say here, we use a little bit more than a 5-gallon bucket. We put the little spigot there on this barrel to be the exact height of a 5-gallon bucket instead of a 7-gallon bucket. That way we could get more out of the barrel if we had to. So it takes about 1.5 of the 5-gallon buckets, and I fill it up to just about the line on there we've figured out is just right. Now this was the mixing pump that we used for years. It's like an old Rossmont or something like that, but it gave up the ghost a few years or a few months ago I should say. So we've been doing it a little slower recently. We have some smaller pumps I'm going to throw in there real quick, and then I'll show you how that's done. So if you're mixing supplements like this, obviously a larger pump is going to get the job done a lot quicker. Like I said, ours just died not too long ago, so in here now I have a small, I believe it's an old Tunzi style propeller pump, and just a good old maxi jet. So the water in here is not moving quite as turbidly as we've been used to, but it does the job, albeit just a little bit slower. We've kind of, through trial and error, figured out that for our amount of water that we mix up here, 3 liters of the dry powder is just right. Sorry, that's getting a little angry down in there. Yeah, through trial and error, we figured out that about 3 liters of the dry powder is what this amount of water takes to hit the saturation point. If we add much more than that, it never clears up. So I'm gonna just go ahead and add 1 liter at a time, or more like half a liter at a time, kind of slowly over the next couple hours, and by morning, this should be clear and ready to put back in there. So I'm gonna start adding the dried powder here. Let's just go, obviously make sure that your scoop is dry. So let's call that about 1 liter. And we just put in about that much, and then when it's clear, I'll put in the rest, and then when it's clear, I'll put in more, and so on and so forth. So mixing up these supplements from Brightwell is pretty darn easy. We've been using them since the inception of the studio. We find them about as easy as it gets. You know, especially if you need large amounts, shipping a dry powder is a lot more economical than shipping a liquid. So getting these buckets of powder really gets us a long ways. All right, we're here now. It's the following day. I got this filled up last night, and it's pretty much back in normal operation. It's still a little bit cloudy from the process of me filling it up, but as it operates and as gravity allows things in there to settle a little bit more, that'll become crystal clear probably within the next 24 hours. I figured out, I looked at the app, in case you guys are curious. Each of the 3 large calc reactors on the Coral Flats is each dosing 10 liters of saturated calc solution per day. And then on our smaller, comparatively smaller systems over on the peninsulas, those are dosing 3 liters of kalkwasser per day, which is about half of our top off, to be honest. So we have a pretty equal consumption rate between the top off vat and the kalkwasser vat. So I'd say, you know, about 10 liters per coral flat per day is about what we evaporate. And that's another factor you'd have to consider when dosing kalkwasser, is it is dependent on how much your tank evaporates. So if you are in a closed up space or you have a tight fitting glass lid, your tank's not evaporating that much, you're not going to be able to utilize kalkwasser quite to the extent that we do here. Obviously a kalkwasser reactor or stir like these is not the only way to run calc. A lot of people will just put it straight in their top off water or do something similar. You know, different strokes for different folks, whatever works for you personally. I know this video wasn't super information dense about the exact chemistry and the exact benefits and why you'd want to use kalkwasser. This is more of kind of just our maintenance routines here at the studio, and emphasizing how important it is to just keep your gear clean, especially something like a piece of equipment that deals with kalkwasser and things that get really crusty pretty quick. It's really important. If you're not going to clean it, you know, you might as well not even be running it in the first place. You can see the drip rate on this, to my eye, does look slightly increased over what it was yesterday, and that's likely just due to clearing out some of the little crusty bits in the actual downspout inside the reactor. It wasn't fully clogged by any means, but it was 20% clogged, let's just say that. And up here on the pH monitor, now you can see, since we reset the calc and put new powder in there, you know, now it's up to 12.4. That's like much more in the neighborhood of what we're looking for. Even though there was still powder circulating in the bottom of the reactor, the pH indicated that there was not a whole lot of potency or life left in that kalkwasser. When we fully take apart one of the reactors over to the sink and actually give it an acid bath, a full clean, then this is less of an issue, because I'll put the powder, I'll put the kalkwasser in there, like over the sink, or at least away from the aquarium. So if I did spill a little bit, it wouldn't be the end of the world. However, when we clean these in place and we're just kind of recharging them, you have to be really careful not to get any of that like dry kalkwasser powder in the aquarium. If a piece of that were to fall on a coral, it would really be bad news. And that brings me to another point that I meant to make, which is that kalkwasser is meant to be used with fresh water. You do not run salt water through a kalkwasser reactor. You do not try to mix kalkwasser with salt water. That doesn't really work. So the line of water running into our reactors is all fresh water, and you have to dissolve it in fresh water and let it settle before you can dose it to your tank. I know there's people out there experimenting with calc slurry, and I will let you do your own research on that if you feel so inclined. But kalkwasser is for freshwater use. You can pick up a relatively inexpensive pH probe / monitor like we have here, and I think that's a really valuable tool if you are going to implement kalkwasser, because as you could see in this video, just because there's powder in there, you can't assume the potency of the solution. So by checking it and having a regular schedule, you know, you don't have to monitor it forever, but if you do it for a few months and figure out that, yeah, about every 6 weeks we need to recharge this, now you know that. Of course, I really do want to thank Brightwell for providing the Calc Plus 2 that we use in all of our kalkwasser reactors, as well as all the other supplements, the alkalinity, the calcium, the magnesium, the Lugel's iodine dip, the random amino acids and coral foods that we use around the studio for various things. So huge shout out to Brightwell. We really could not run the studio without you guys, and it's things like this that really make the magic happen. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this kind of little sneak peek or behind the scenes tour of what I personally do here at the studio. It's things like this, it's projects like this that keep me very occupied every day, and I'm happy to be able to bring those to you. Can't wait for your comments. We have a good healthy list of videos for the future that we want to bring you guys, but if you have any ideas of your own that you want to toss down there and give us a few ideas, maybe some maintenance task that we haven't really covered thoroughly around the studio, or you name it, I'm open to any and all suggestions. So I can't wait to see your comments. Hit subscribe, share it with your friends, and until then, I will see you on the next video. Later, guys.